Hello friends, we can start our class. Today also we are dealing with logical reasoning and some of the important topics today we are going to deal on. The fallacies in arguments. Okay, fallacies means some mistakes happening in the arguments, and distribution and undistribution. Already we discussed about distribution and undistribution in the previous video, and its extension of that we can see in this video. Okay, so without wasting time, I think it's better we can start on with our class. Be attentive to the class. Okay. So valid sentence or standard form. What is a valid sentence? I have already told about it in the previous class, but I am giving it again because after knowing this only, we can go to the fallacies. Okay, valid sentence. Okay, valid sentence means S1 is the premise one. Okay, S1 is the sentence one or the premise one. And S2, that is the premise 2, that is the second sentence, and we have a conclusion. Okay, so argument, there is two premise and one conclusion is there. For an argument, there are two premises and one conclusion is there. So we want to find whether this argument is in standard form or in a valid form. We want to find it. How we can find it? Look at this. All men are mortal. Okay, all men are mortal. So here you can say all men are mortal. Here mortal is the predicate. Understood? Mortal is the predicate in the premise 1. In the premise 1, mortal is the predicate. And the premise 2, all animals are man. In this animals is it is the subject. Okay. And what is the conclusion? All animals are mortal. So we can see that in the conclusion, that is the predicate of the premise 1 become the predicate of the conclusion, and the subject of the premise 2 become the subject of the conclusion. If this law is done, then the sentence is valid. Understood? The law means that you must know that the premise 1's predicate should be the predicate, and the premise 2's what the subject should be the subject to the conclusion. Then we can say that that sentence is valid. So that is what I have written here. The predicate is the major term. The mortal, this is the major term, and animals, that is the subject of the premise 2, is the minor term. And what is the middle term? Middle term is that we can see in the P1 and P2. P1 means premise 1 and premise 2. That we can see in both is the man. Man we can see in this and also in this. So man is here the common term, and it is called the middle term. So I think now you are clear about what is a valid sentence or a standard form. Now we can see the extended form of it. This distribution of terms in a categorical proposition that I have told you earlier. Earlier itself. That is all. When a sentence is started with all, the subject is distributed. If the sentence that starts with no, then its subject as well as predicate is distributed. If a sentence that starts with some, then both subject as well as predicate, there is no distribution is there. And if a sentence that starts with some not, then we can see only the predicate is distributed. So I have given this again to just to keep it in your memory. After keeping these two papers, or what do you say, these two slides, you have to move on with the next part. We can see that the rules. What's the rules of it? What is the rules we have to find to whether any fallacies are there, or any how the distribution should be. Distribution, there are some rules regarding the distribution. So already I told you one of the distribution law is that in all sentences it should be the distribution word, whether it is in the subject or in the predicate, whether in the no word, whether it is in the subject or in the predicate. In sentences that start with some word, it should be, and a sentence that start with some not word should be the distribution. Okay. After keeping all that thing, one more point you have to keep in mind, whether the sentence is right or wrong. What is that? The middle term. Okay, clear that. You keep that in this middle term. Distribution in any one. Middle term, you know that middle term means a word that is common in both P1 and P2. Okay, distributed in any one of the premises. That is the first rule. Okay, a middle term should be distributed. You know what is distribution? Distributed in any one of the P1 or P2, either in the premise 1 or in the premise 2, the middle term should be distributed. It can be distributed in 2. Both of them, if it is distributed, then it is also okay. Then it has a conclusion. So if an argument need to get a conclusion, what is the rule is that the middle term should be distributed in either P1 or P2, or it can be distributed in both of the sentences. Okay, a distribution is needed. Okay, distribution is needed in P1 or P2, or it can be distributed in both P1 and P2. That is the middle term. Then only that argument have a conclusion. Okay, that is the point you have to keep in mind. Then next is if P1. Okay, if P1 is undistributed and P2 is distributed, then there is no conclusion. Okay, then the argument should not have any conclusion. So undistribution and distribution come, there is no conclusion. And if P1, that is undistribution and undistribution come, then there is no conclusion. So you can keep it as a easy way, undistribution, distributed, undistributed, distributed. When it come like this, there is no conclusion. So you keep this in the memory. Okay, these 2 points you have to keep in mind. Then only you can understand whether the sentence is distributed and it has its own rules, whether it's following, whether it has a conclusion. You have to find it. Whether they ask the question, whether this sentence have a conclusion, you want to find whether the distribution is in P1 and P2. Okay, or it is in both of the sentences. If the middle term is distributed, then it is okay. Then it should have a conclusion. If it is undistributed, is starting with an undistribution, then the conclusion will not be come. So that you have to keep in the mind. Understood? Next, we are talking about the fallacies. This is another important part. They have asked a lot of time about the middle term or illicit middle term, undistributed middle term fallacy. They have asked in the question paper. So you must know what it is. Okay, fallacy on undistributed middle term. I told you earlier itself, the middle term should be distributed in any one of the. Anyone means P1 or P2. Any one of the sentences should be distributed, or it can be distributed in both of the sentences. Then it's okay. Okay, if it is not distributed, what will happen? There come the fallacy. Fallacy means mistake in the argument. That is P1. All dogs are cats. Here, cats is undistributed. Cats is the middle term. Cats is, we can see in the both, we can see the cats, and cats is undistributed. All pen are cats. Here also we can see it is undistributed. So both is undistributed. Okay, cats here, all dogs are cats. Here cats is the middle term. Okay, it's a middle term and it is undistributed in both of them. Then what we call it as the fallacy of undistributed middle term. Okay, what we call it as, it is the fallacy of undistributed middle term or illicit middle term distribution. Okay, illicit middle term distribution, or what we call it as fallacy of undistributed middle term. Okay, that you have to understand. Okay, so the middle term in both of these is undistributed. So what we call it as is the fallacy of undistributed middle term. Next, we are going to the fallacy of major term. Which is the major term here? Okay, all runners are athletes. Some swimmers are not runners. Here, which is the major term? Athletes is the major term. You know that the predicate of the first sentence is the major term. And what happened is that major term become undistributed. So when major term become undistributed, and in the conclusion it is distributed. Okay, undistributed, distributed come, there is no conclusion. We have already studied in the previous law itself. That is why I have given you the laws first. First you have to study the laws in a proper way. Then only you are able to understand what I have given here. Okay. So in the first sentence, the major term. So you find here the major term, it is undistributed, and in the conclusion it is distributed. Okay. So what happens is that undistributed, distributed come, there is no conclusion. What we call it as illicit major term or fallacy of major term. Okay, the fallacy of the major term we call it. Next is fallacy of minor term. So which is the minor term here? The second sentence subject is the minor term. Second sentence subject means singer here. All singers are dancers. Some singers are musicians. Okay. Here singers is the what happens? It is the subject, and it is undistributed. And what happens in the conclusion, the subject, okay, in the conclusion it is undistributed. So undistributed come, what happens? There is no conclusion. So that is called a fallacy. Both undistributions come, there is a fallacy. Undistributed, then it become a fallacy, and there is no conclusion. Fallacy means mistake or illicit minor term, what we call it. Okay. So I think now you are clear about illicit major term means major term become undistributed then distributed. If it is a minor term fallacy, then it is first undistributed then distributed. Undistributed can be or distributed can be. So that will come in the case of minor term. Okay, understood? So I think you are clear about it. If you have doubts, you can ask in the comment box. Okay. And then you first study the laws. Next, exclusive premise fallacy. What is exclusive premise fallacy? At least one premise must be affirmative. Exclusive premise fallacy means premise, we have two premises, P1 and P2 is there. Either any one of it should be positive. Affirmative means positive sentence without any no. Then only it should have a conclusion. Understood? You can see that. That is P1 and P2 negative sentences, then there is no conclusion. Understood? P1 means premise 1, P2 means premise 2. If both are negative sentences, then there is no conclusion. P1 is positive, then P2 is positive, conclusion can be positive. The P1 is positive, P2 can be negative, then conclusion is negative. P1 can be negative, it can be positive, but it can be negative conclusion. And here both are negative, then no conclusion is there. It is what we call as exclusive premise fallacy. What we call it as exclusive premise fallacy. If both the sentences are negative, then there is no conclusion. That is what we call as exclusive premise fallacy. Understood? If that is premise 1 and premise 2, either any one of it should be positive. If it is not positive, if both are negative, then there is no conclusion, and what we call it as exclusive premise fallacy. Next is negative from positive fallacies. Okay, negative from positive fallacy. But we can see that, for example, P1 is positive, P2 is positive, and conclusion become negative. Then negative from the positive fallacy. That is another kind of fallacy. That's a rare type. Some A or B. Okay, some B or C. So both are positive sentence and they have given a conclusion as no A or C. Okay, no A or C. Then it become a negative sentence. Then it is a negative from positive fallacy. It's a fallacy. The fallacy means mistake is the negative from positive fallacy. Okay. So positive, negative come, then it is a fallacy. What kind of fallacy is that? Negative from positive fallacy. Next is existential fallacy. Existential, the word itself, existential, exist, want to exist. That is existential fallacy. More fallacy in argument is one fallacy. Sometimes minor term fallacy is there. Sometimes major term fallacy is there. Sometimes negative from positive fallacy is there. Sometimes illicit fallacy is there. Like that. Fallacies. If more fallacies come in one argument itself, we call it as existential fallacy. What we call it as existential fallacy. Okay. More fallacy in argument. Two or more fallacies in one argument. For example, some A are not B. Okay. So B is undistributed. No A or C and no A or B. Okay. Then here B is one undistributed, distributed. So we know that major term. B is the, here it's a predicate and here it is also the predicate. So that rule is over. And here undistributed, distributed, there is no conclusion. So it is illicit major term. Fallacy is the exclusive premise means, you know, that is one positive sentence. Some A are not B. Already it is given here. Not B means negative sentence is there. And no A or C, again a negative sentence is here. No A or B. Again negative sentence is coming here. So you know that if two negative sentences come, there is no conclusion. What we call as exclusive premise fallacy. What we call exclusive premise fallacy. So two fallacies come here. Illicit major term fallacy and exclusive premise fallacy. If two fallacies or more than one fallacies come, we call it as existential fallacy. What we call it as existential fallacy. I think now you are clear about it. Just go through it. Okay. So it is not an long class, it is a small class, but it is a little bit difficult to understand. You go through each lines, okay? Then you hear my lectures. After that, you again go through the lines. Then you get an idea. If you don't get it, you just comment on the comment box. I will explain to you. Okay, you don't worry about it. You study well. You study the rules first. If you study the rules first, then you are able to understand it in a proper way. So we have studied only a little bit, that is undistributed and distribution, some kind of fallacies, that is major, illicit major fallacy, illicit minor fallacy, exclusive fallacy, then existential fallacy you have seen here, and distribution, how it come. Okay, a valid sentence, how it is the valid sentence, and we have seen which sentences have the conclusions. All these things we have seen is very important in the case of logical reasoning, because logical reasoning, it is mainly based on the arguments and all. So you must know how these sentences will come. So you must go through it, study well. Okay, don't forget to subscribe the channel, study well, be attentive to the class. Okay, we can meet in the next class. Now, God bless you, all of you. Thank you.